It's once again an honor to be up here and an honor to be included with this fine group of inductees and presenters. And it's my pleasure to induct a gentleman that came out of the era that Jim McGee alluded to, when they had bombers, six-cylinder cars, the cut-downs were strong, they had the full coupes. And this gentleman was from my particular area where I lived, Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts. And he was a tremendous competitor, a master of the short tracks, both Norwood and Seekonk, and he had great success at the other tracks in the area. He started out at Norwood, and in the year of 1954, it had been written, I was a little too young to remember, but that year they raced 4 different classes at Norwood, and Joe Rosenfield was the champion in 3 of those 4 classes. And in the other class, the modifieds, which were cut down, so he came in 7th or 8th. So it wasn't too shabby a year for Joe. He was actually born in Rhode Island and moved to Bridgewater, Mass. At an early age. And he was apparently quite the young man around town, as I've been told. He had one of the first cars, and of course he was the hit with all his friends because he would chauffeur them around everywhere. And he also was known to take a horse for a ride from Bridgewater to Brockton, which was about 15 miles. Why? I haven't been able to find out, but he did. But he lost a little favor with his friends one night. They were roller skating at Square Acres in Bridgewater. And Joe was, much like myself, a little portly. And he was ended up at the end of a whip. And everybody thought it would be kind of funny to send Joe for a ride. So off they did, and Joe went over the rail, landed on his skates, and said, "The hell with these people." He went out the door and left them all to fend for themselves to get home. So that might have been the start of his competitive nature. But after he mastered Norwood pretty well, he ran Lonsdale. He won a feature in Lonsdale in the bomber cars. And then he moved to Seekonk in the later 50s. He mastered that place pretty good because he ended up being track champion there in 1960, 1961, 1962, and 1964. And that was the heyday of the flathead full coupes at Seekonk, and weekly they had upwards of 40 machines, and just making the feature was quite an accomplishment. And Big Joe, as he was known, took the measure of all of them those 4 years, driving mostly for Arthur Smith's number 44s, and then in the last year of his championships, he drove for Dick Willis's, the Jelly Bean Special at number 47. I remember Willis's car because he was one of the 3 or 4 guys at Seekonk that took great pride in concocting their own special racing fuel. I remember I got stuck in the tunnel there one August night when the cars were waiting to go on the track. And if you had the worst sinus condition ever, standing next to that car for about 10 seconds would have cleared everything. Your ears, your eyes, your throat, nose, you could breathe great again. It was great. It made your eyes water, but it was great. After the flatheads kind of went away, he ran the late models for quite a few years, did a little traveling around. He ran for Leo Matty and Mr. Robinson that owns Riverside Park. Not Riverside Park, sorry folks, I'm in the neighborhood. Riverside Speedway, Groveton, New Hampshire. He also ran a late model for Pepsi Jim Rogers, which was on the Seekonk and Westboro circuit, and that was Joe's last feature win, was in Jim's Pepsi Chevy 2 at Westboro in 1968. But Joe soldiered on for quite a few more years in C.J. Robinson's cars, and ran the Seekonk, Thompson on occasion, and was a frequent visitor to Oxford Plains, Maine, where he's still remembered today and well respected. And of course, as most of our instances, you get involved in racing and it passes on to your family. And Joe's son, Joe Jr., had quite a good driving career himself, and also a successful career as a car owner in Maine for many years. His other son, Jimmy, still runs at Seekonk. Got himself a feature recently. Made his mom feel good because she sits right near where I sit. I always watch her agonizing over the boys. And David has been known to take a few laps, Brother David, in all kinds of cars, midgets, SKs, and everything. And it was a pleasure to have watched Joe race over these years and to see his family carry on in his legacy. And it is my honor to officially have inducted into the New England Antique Racers Hall of Fame, Joe Rosenfield Sr.
Well, the story with the horse, he had a theory that he'd always have more money in his pocket if he invited the girls to the movies and met them inside. He did play whip on the skating ring, and when they whipped him out to the railing around the outside, he went through the railing, not over, and he was asked not to come back because he was too rough. He raced a lot of tracks with a lot of people. In my mind, and my whole family's mind, he was a great hero. He had a lot of heroes himself. He loved Bugsy Stevens. He loved racing with Bugsy. Leo Cleary, George Summers, Ron Bouchard. His greatest hero of all, we went to Stafford every Friday night because he never saw a man drive a race car like Billy Wimple. He was the master on dirt. My father went to the races many, many nights because he wanted to study the drivers. Everybody that ran up front had something to learn. He wanted to learn more from the many drivers that he competed with. I stood in the tunnel many times with him where Bob was talking about, and he'd go out in one warm-up and he'd come in and the car was good. He was very content. He'd stand there in that tunnel at Seekonk and he'd watch these guys go out and practice and practice and practice. And he'd walk back to their car and he'd tell them, boy, you're going tonight. You're hooked up. Tonight's your win. Well, that put the end to them guys going back out for warm-ups. He outsmarted them just by talking to them. He was very, very smooth, very consistent. You could set a clock by him. He loved racing with people. He loved joking and playing games with people. He beat a lot of them playing games with them. He loved his family, and he loved automobile racing. If he was alive today, he'd want to still be racing. It was the greatest thing that he ever did. And I know that he'd be very, very proud to accept this. I wish he was here so he could. To me, this is the greatest honor that he could ever get. Thank you very much.